Hello, one viewer. Just give it a few minutes to allow other people to come in.
Yeah, and I think this is where we want to be cautious that we're not, we don't have another window going that is also following the broadcast. Otherwise, you get a looping thing with the audio. Remember that, Carolyn?
Oh, yes. I had forgotten that. Okay. So it's close the event page.
I think so, yeah.
Thank you. Done. So when you see the Google Hangout event page, when Scott and I were playing with it earlier, when that was open, it kept
We'd get a delay of like 20 seconds or 30 seconds, right, of the broadcast, and then you get the audio coming back into the conversation from that, which was very confusing.
Yeah. Well, I'll give it a couple more minutes, and then I think we'll just go ahead, and it'll be recorded.
Yeah.
We can then share and promote that recording to others. Out of curiosity, and just to allow a little bit more time. Okay, we've got 5 viewers now. Leander, how is in the UK? How are you finding? How are things evolving for you? Are they getting more and more people identifying with alternative currencies and what you're saying, or are you noticing a shift?
There has been several shifts recently, and Bitcoin, of course, was the biggest shifter. But that discussion is always a bit confusing and confounded. I don't know if you saw, there was a Guardian article recently to which I contributed. About half the text in the first one was somewhat critical about Bitcoin, the currency, and me just pointing to other ones raised a lot of mad voices from the Bitcoin community, and then are hard to rein in again. So it's getting more and more important to actually point towards the objectives of these different currencies, not to have technical discussions instead.
Yes.
Teleologicals.
Yes, and that's what will bring people to the table. Okay. Well, we're up to 10 viewers, so I'm gonna begin. Okay, so hi and welcome. My name's Caroline Smalley, and I'm co-founder of a global investment cooperative called the Citizens Media. It's designed to shift finance into ways of working that facilitate equal opportunity and help humanity to thrive. So a big part of that debate is alternative complementary currencies, which is why I've invited the panel of guests here today and why I'm here. So what are currencies, alternative currencies? What are currencies? Why do they exist? And where's it all going? Okay, so we'll begin by asking our panel to take a moment to introduce themselves, and we'll launch into some questions and leave 10 minutes or so at the end for anyone who wants to come in and directly ask our panel a question. To keep momentum going, I'm going to ask our panel to keep their answers to about 2 minutes or less. And on the Hangout, you should see, looking for it now, a Q&A tool. Please use it. Your questions are appreciated. And if we don't get to them all today, then not to worry. We'll use them to continue the discussion in future Hangouts. Okay, so Michelle, who are you? What do you do? How does it relate to the currency debate?
All right, well, my name is Michel Bouwens. I'm the founder of the P2P Foundation. And so we're basically interested in everything that's peer-to-peer, and that would include the peer production of money and seeing money as a commons. So from that point of view, it would follow that we are not so enthusiastic about commodity currencies. You know, again, I mentioned Bitcoin as a good example, which is a pure commodity currency, and we wouldn't be so enthusiastic about. So we would critique the way in which Bitcoin is produced, when it's called peer-to-peer, but the peer-to-peer is in the computers and not in the humans. And so we would have a critical point of view about that. This being said, we're not currency experts, by any means, but we would like to participate in the co-construction of a real common currency.
Okay, thank you. Scott.
Hi, so I'm a technologist with about 25 years working with progressive organizations, helping them adopt, in particular, open source and peer-to-peer technology. Was early on in bringing the World Wide Web into the progressive community here in Western Canada. Got quite interested in currencies, mostly around Bitcoin. I picked up on Bitcoin in about 2010. It was sort of popping in some of the communities that I'm involved in. And so I guess by today's standards, I'm an early adopter of Bitcoin and been a proponent of Bitcoin for the progressive community and for progressive ideals. My latest project is called Dana.io, D-A-N-A.io, which is a crowdfunding platform based upon the Buddhist concept of unconditional giving or generosity. So we have a real focus on the artists and activists, and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies actually in general are something that we're supporting and promoting strongly on that site.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Leander.
Yes, hello, this is Leander Bindewald, and I'm currently working at the New Economics Foundation in London. That's been for the last 2 years, and I've been involved with all kinds of different currencies for a number of years just before that. And here at the New Economics Foundation, we have been researching and talking and reframing economy and what a new economy that takes care of people and the planet would look like. We've been researching that for the last 20, 25 years, and currencies, at least for the last 20 years, have been one element in this. Not so much then on the pure economic side, which often captures Bitcoin enthusiasts, but really on the social and environmental side. So we've been working with lead systems in the 90s, and then time banks around the millennium, and still continue to do a lot of work with time banks, but then also moved over to the new developments in the field, like these, in the narrow sense, local currencies and the Bristol pound, Brixton pound model, and are now part of a big European project called Community Currencies in Action with 8 partners around Northwest Europe. And in that one, we are researching and communicating about all the different kinds of community currencies that we know out there. So just to draw a line between this whole big world of complementary currencies where any different currency but legal tender would be part of, we say community currencies are best described as those who actually don't have a for-profit objectives, and that then again can be anything from social time bank currencies to local currencies to also even business-to-business currencies, mutual credit currencies, if they're governed in an appropriate way. And we're really excited that we have pilot currencies at the moment across Holland and Belgium and France and the UK that cover this whole variety of different models and different objectives. And yeah,
I like that definition of currencies that aren't there to gain a profit. It's a useful one. Because you mentioned Bristol pound and Brixton pound, I know that coin have got a lot to do with that. Edgar, do we have you online? I know Edgar had some issues getting online earlier, so. Can you hear us, Edgar? Okay, Matt. Give Edgar a moment to hopefully figure that out. But, hi.
Hello, my name is Matthew Slater. I'm a software engineer, and I've been working for the last 5 to 6 years making open source software for local small-scale community clearing systems. And so there's around 100 of them using my software on Community Forge, which offers hosted sites. And in my work with these grassroots communities, I've learned a lot about their requirements and how to design community currencies.
Thank you. Okay, so we still don't have Edgar online. Fingers crossed, and I can see some questions coming in here, so bear with me because I don't have anyone sort of flagging up questions that come. I want to start by covering some of the basics though. So what are the issues that alternative currencies are working to solve? In other words, what is currency? Why was it created? What are the failures of today's systems that alternative currencies are seeking to address? Scott, let's begin with you.
Beginning with me? Yeah, well, I mean, I'm here to ostensibly talk more about cryptocurrencies. I do have some experience with let systems and small-scale community currencies as well, but in terms of the purpose of cryptocurrency, well, of course, the intentions of Bitcoin are pretty clear in the anonymous author. You know, he was very clear that he was reacting against central banks' control and management of the economy, ostensibly, and didn't like that model. So, you know, this is his attempt to, very clearly to react against that with something that isn't subject to the whims of human folly or wisdom, for that matter. And that was not my main reason for being attracted to Bitcoin. My main reason was actually around the censorship-proof nature of it. The fact, when the U.S. government brought its financial blockade against WikiLeaks, and the only way that you could transmit any value and support WikiLeaks was through Bitcoin. It was the only thing out there. That was a pretty important point. Point was made, and it's a very important period, in my view, one of the most important periods in the history of Bitcoin. Now, other cryptocurrencies, of which there's now, probably thousands by now, who knows, they are basically attempts to tweak certain variables, take the Bitcoin code for the most part, because it is it's a big deal now, and tweaking some aspect of it, making some changes to the way that it works, and wrapping other values around it. So you've got a whole series of coins out there now that are focusing on different issues, but bringing the whole cryptocurrency paradigm. And the important part of that paradigm is really that there is no central authority that determines which transactions go through and which don't, unlike any other payment system. Yeah.
Decentralization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, what's the issue we're working to address here with alternative currencies?
For me, the most important function of money is the medium of exchange function, as opposed to, say, the store of value or the measure of value. And the medium of exchange function means that we can bring our goods to marketplace and sell them to one person and then buy something from another person without having to go through all that complicated business of trying to find someone who wants exactly what you have to sell. So the purpose of currency is therefore to bring liquidity to the marketplace to allow people to trade. But currency isn't really for that in the modern world. As Michelle was saying earlier, everything is a commodity currency now, and they have a very different function, which in my view is about taking the wealth, the value created by the producers, and giving them to the rich people who already hold all the value and own everything. So for me, the most important thing which complementary currencies need to achieve is to help us to get out from under the boot of those people who have all the value, and to enable us to create our own marketplaces where we can trade with each other on an equitable basis. But there are many other reasons as well for using a different kind of money, but we don't have time for that.
Okay, good answer. Thank you. Leander.
Yeah, there's probably a number of hearts living in my chest when it comes to these currencies, and of course they're more abstract treaty of what money is and what money does and how that's better designed and better employed on any scale would be one way of approaching it at the moment, and working with a lot of different communities and people who want to try to set that up, and working with the pilots that we are kind of observing and researching in the EU project. It is mostly the case that it's easier to explain these social technologies, these tools, as very particular vehicles to achieve something in the world, and when it comes down to that, then it's rather about the objectives that people might have that they see underserved in their communities or in the bigger picture as large as they want to pick that. And there we often just really delimitate between currencies that have a social purpose, and there's a number of currency designs that are more appropriate to speak to these, or these currencies that have an environmental purpose. So you design your currency to do behavioral changes or reduce carbon, or there's currencies that even have a very specific economic purpose, again, serving what is kind of lacking from the national systems or international systems as we see them at the moment. And each of these objectives then comes with a certain design process and design criteria, involves different stakeholders. And when you start then looking into these different stakeholders that you need to bring together, that's where currency design and operation becomes really tricky and an iterative, very dynamic process, because it's not as easy as a national currency that we kind of rely on these structures from outside the currency world, say our democracies and our nation states, to kind of provide a substrate for the currency and money to be issued. But we're kind of building two things at the same time: the community and the governance system around that, plus then the currency that community will use.
Mm-hmm. That's identifying values behind the alternative currencies is key, because they'll attract a certain market, and right now we're playing in that. Is that sort of a fair summary?
Values is really all it comes back to, and the shared values that a community of users will then base their exchanges on is the most fundamental dimension for me to analyze and design and understand these currencies.
Okay, thank you, thanks. Edgar's still trying to come in. When we'll, touch, fingers crossed, and we'll have him soon. In the meantime, Michelle, why do alternative currencies, what's the purpose of what we're trying to achieve?
Well, I agree with Leander that we need a pluralism in the currency world, and so the kind of design that we implement depends on the objectives that we want. I don't know if you've seen this. I have this kind of scheme where I distinguish 4 different technology regimes, where basically you have global centralized control versus distributed control, for profit versus for benefit orientation. And the first one, which I don't really see in currencies right now, is what I call netarchical capitalism, the hierarchy of the network, where you have peer-to-peer front end, but the whole back end is controlled by the platform owners, right? And so it's a for-profit orientation and a centralized control. Bitcoin is for-profit orientation with a distributed control. I think if we look at the reality of Bitcoin, we immediately see that that doesn't work, because the Gini coefficient of Bitcoin is higher than national money. So there's more inequality in Bitcoin ownership than there is already in society. So it increases inequality rather than solving it. But what Bitcoin has, and I agree with Scott's analysis, it remains a reserve currency, it remains an activist tool. And what it showed is that you can globally scale an alternative currency. And I think that was the weakness until then of complementary currencies. Of course, some of them are designed to stay small because they have a local function. But I think that people like me and probably people like you, we feel the need for an alternative currency that can scale. And so in this sense, I think Bitcoin provides, because Bitcoin is not a commons currency, but a Bitcoin code is a commons, right? So we can work and tweak and change the code of Bitcoin and maybe try to make something different that has commons aspects in the code. Now, I don't know if that will work. There was one project called Frycoin. It had a negative interest rate, but I think they've done some things wrong, because it didn't quite take off. And there have been a number of attempts. A friend of mine calls them Marx coins, and basically the idea is to have an equal distribution of those coins. But again, that doesn't take into account the power law, which is even if you start, equally, and if you don't do anything to maintain that equality, you're going to concentration anyway, because some people make better decisions than others. They start accumulating, and before you know it, you have a highly skewed. So we need to think in terms of design. Can we do a design that avoids concentration? And I'm not sure I have all the answers to this, but I want to give you an example where it works. If you look at Amazon and Apple iTunes, you know, they used to talk about a long tail, right? That if you have distributed music, then you would enable and empower small musicians to have their niche audiences. Well, it turns out that it's not true, that Amazon is more highly concentrated than the mayors before. But there are exceptions, and one exception is in France, an open source music platform called Gemendo, where they have protocols against concentration, right? And they achieved a long tail. They have a pretty good long tail because they have these measures. So this is my question to the experts who know more than me about this is, can we think of a fork that is a monetary design that acts against concentration? In other words, that maintains, you know, maybe not full equality, but an acceptable distribution that is not extreme.
So, yeah, thank you, Michelle. I mean, to me, that explores sort of what Leander was talking about, as in, okay, what are the different things that are going to appeal to different people? And there are different things that the various currencies are addressing, different approaches that they're using in order to address that. But the bottom line is, the reason that alternative currencies, the reason we're all working to this is to facilitate equal opportunity. And one of the tools to do that is, well, we've got to have distributed systems for this. It can't be through central control. We need to invite peer-to-peer commons within the process. But we need to have systems that enable us to sustain the equality as it grows. Something like that.
I agree.
Edgar again is coming in and out. Unfortunately, still not here. I'm looking at some of the questions coming in. Scott Morris asked, how can we engage local regional populations in the ownership management of their own currencies? Are there any success examples of this? How can we engage local regional populations in the ownership management? I've highlighted it, so hopefully you can see that. And are there any successful examples? Leander, I invite you to speak to that one first.
I am unmuted. Thanks. I guess that really requires a bit of education that has to happen first of all, and of course the financial crisis helped to raise the topic on the agenda of everybody, but unless people understand that money is really a social technology that they can influence, that they can participate in, it's a really hard pitch for any complementary currency practitioner to go out and tell people, here, look, there's something new happening, why don't you want to participate in that? People most often don't realize that they can actually choose a different money, design a different money, engage in money in a different way. And that is, of course, a very long game that we're playing in that sense. And any of these currencies is doing their parts in raising the awareness of people about these possibilities. And then if you have packed yourself to that one currency design or that one currency project, then in the end, of course, it's again a yin-yang process of course, you have to propose something and then engage people with it, but it's often better to first engage them and then come up with the currency, which then naturally is their own currency that they take ownership of. But these processes, again, are not quick and easy, and with our partner in France, in the city of Nantes, that had been a 5-year process from open consultations about what the city might want to do on their sustainability agenda till now when they finally are preparing to launch a currency for the region of Nantes. That is a very, very long endeavor.
How do we engage people? It's it's a big question. Scott, what do you think?
Well, I mean, frankly, when looking at that question, I was immediately going to defer to Matthew, since he probably has a lot more experience in sort of local, regional populations, and I mean, given the model that he described that he's working with, I mean, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, they are world-centric currencies. So there's nothing to encourage them to stay within any geographical region. And in fact, quite the opposite. So they're really not meant for this kind of thing. I mean, you will see local initiatives. You know, there's lots of attention on Africa and how can we bring the advantages of Bitcoin for remittances, for example. But I mean, that's sure, you know, cheaper remittances to places like the Philippines or, you know, the so-called less developed countries. That would be great for those populations, but it doesn't really, I mean, only only if you really sort of twist the meaning of this question, I think, does that address the local or regional populations, I think, because we're talking about global movement of money.
Yeah, I mean, there are tools out there that I'm just thinking about what Coin do, using open source software that does actually invite anyone who's out there to create their own currencies. But it's not just about creating that currency, it's about then how you engage others. So to me, it sort of goes into the topic of convergence and how can we converge currencies, but that's later on. Yeah. So, Matt, Scott invited you in there. Sorry, what's...
Yes, I don't attempt to engage with communities myself because I don't have the resources to reach out. I'm too busy dealing with people who reach out to me and preparing the open source software. So when communities do reach out to me, I can then engage with them by giving them the tools and maybe the basic understanding which they need to go forward by themselves, and maybe the contacts as well of people in the neighborhood or who want to do the same kind of thing. But that's all I can do, really.
Yeah, I do have a remark to interject here, which is, you know, of course we need engagement, but engagement is also a problem. What I mean to say is, when I was a busy professional in my 30s, I engaged with a LED scheme in Antwerp, Belgium, and at that time it was so time-consuming that it was just impossible for me to do it. And you know, you looked at the sociology. I don't know if that's still the case, but certainly at that time, there were the Greens, the unemployed, the hippies. It wasn't exactly, you know, like a cross-section of mainstream society. It was a very particular, you know, minority groups that were interested. And there's nothing wrong with it, but there were, at least then, problems of scaling. I remember reading at the time that, you know, the average LEDs had no more than 240 people. Now, this may all have changed with digitalization, so I'm assuming that the transaction costs of maintaining these systems went down. But still, we have to take into account that if you have a mainstream money that works, and for most of the world, the countries in the world, it works, you know, except when you have a crisis like in Argentina or something like that. But for most of the country, the sovereign money usually functions reasonably well. It's easy. Then asking the population to, you know, higher transaction cost is a problem. So and that's of course where Bitcoin comes in, where if you are technically literate, it's very easy. And I think that's one of the reasons it expanded so rapidly, because it was really easy to use for that kind of population. So I think this is an important issue to address, is the, you know, engagement, yes, but at the same time, it has to be something that that works as easily as real currency. I mean, real in the traditional sense.
If I may come in there just to make this dichotomy that Michael just mentioned between engagement or serving something, actually, that's, for me, that is actually the same thing, because you don't have to. Well, it's an uphill struggle to engage people who don't get anything out of the currency. It is a natural thing for people to engage in the currency that actually delivers against the things they want to see. Now, the examples of the LED system, for example, don't mean that these things don't work. Obviously, many people have engaged with LED systems over the years all over the world, and each individual of these systems might have been small, but there are literally thousands of them out there. So there's something in there for people to still do this. There is something in there for people to engage in something as trivial as the bricks and pound, if you like, because they have an appetite to raise the awareness of this neighborhood and local production in that very weird urban unproductive maybe sense. There is an appetite, of course, of the small traders to access cheaper credit, and if you do offer a currency that speaks to the needs of people, you don't have the problem with engagement at all. That's why objectives and planning for impact or for outcomes of these currencies is crucially important, and there I don't think technology makes such a difference. Bitcoin, yes, is easy to use for, as you said, tech-savvy people, but I think it's more used and attractive to people because it has the property of actually making a quick buck out of buying it at the right moment and selling it again. If any of the other currencies had that property, they would have been, well, devoured in that sense. But I think currencies that cater to people's needs don't have that engagement problem. You see that in time banks, even in many places where if they do something right for the community, people will use it. Once they cease to have a purpose of that sense or work in that way, they might wither and wane again. But that is really all it's a deeper design question than just the technical or the monetary technical sides of it.
And here's a thought: is if, I mean, Bitcoin we've talked about. Okay, so one of the things we need to do is make currency act in a distributed way, and that's one of the big motivations as to, you know, reasons why Bitcoin came about. And then we talk about finding the greatest challenge seems to be how we can maintain equal opportunity as these currencies grow, and will convergence occur? And if we have a currency or currencies that are succeeding in achieving this, maintaining equal opportunity in a distributed manner, do people actually need their own individual way of creating a currency? Because in essence, they would already have that. It's just a thought there. Okay, I can see some questions going into more detail about cryptocurrencies. I don't want to go too far down that route at the moment. We touched on the challenges. We talked about the potential for convergence. So is there a way for alternative currencies to converge? What are the difficulties in doing this, and how can they be overcome? And again, we've touched on it, but perhaps we can further that discussion. Matthew.
Well, the classical way which any two currencies converge is through a marketplace. And the marketplace is sort of separate from the currencies, and it's another space. And the people bring their currencies to the marketplace, and they discover a price for them, and then they exchange them just like any other goods. So anything that you can buy or sell, you can converge through a marketplace. But I'm interested in converging currencies in a slightly different way, in a marketplace where you don't have the rules of the free market, where the biggest and the baddest people always seem to get the best prices. I'd like to see markets set up, run by the peers themselves, and with exchange rates agreed and maintained by the communities themselves. So setting those up requires a lot of politics to be done. I think it's worth it. And then there's also a technical challenge as well, because all of those separate projects are all using different kinds of software or living in different places. So we need a system of APIs to enable those transactions to take place between those systems and to validate that those transactions are not fraudulent. Of course, the blockchain itself, the distributed database underlying Bitcoin, would be excellent for that.
Thank you. Scott, Bitcoin was mentioned. I'll bring you in there.
Bitcoin's mentioned every time. Yeah, well, you know, this question of the distribution. You know, I'm long-time eco, justice, you know, equality all that good stuff. It seems to me that I think one of the opposing values here with this notion of equal distribution is privacy around the transaction. So if you build any measure of privacy into your currency and the ability to protect your privacy when making transaction, which again is very important when you consider the case of something like WikiLeaks, right? Not everyone wants to stand up and say, I support WikiLeaks, and I support it to such an extent that I support it financially, that we know you are going to be placed on some kind of watch list somewhere, right? I mean, the last year's Snowden revelations really has helped illuminate what's going on in terms of this kind of data collection. So, if you do design that into your currency, and that's designed to some extent into Bitcoin, it's only considered pseudo-anonymous, but there are other alternative currencies which are taking a much harder look at the privacy of transactions. Darkcoin and Monero and Zero Cash and some of these other initiatives. It seems to me that it's once you bake that into your system, the ability to have some mechanism that would somehow make sure that there's equitable distribution is just impossible. It's just not going to happen. You have to, if you're going to prevent the accumulation in some way, shape, or fashion, that requires knowing who owns or controls that portion of it. So I just see those as being fundamentally opposing values. That's not to say that you can't design a currency that has a different mechanism for its initial distribution. And I mean, there's things like Aurora Coin, right, which was an attempt to create a cryptocurrency for the citizens of Iceland. And so they mined all these coins, and then they set a date that every registered citizen of Iceland would get, percentage of the coins as a way to sort of kickstart a currency. I know the Lakota Nation in the States is looking at doing something similar. I'm talking actually to the Squamish here, which you'll be very interested in, who are also interested in doing their own cryptocurrency, figuring out some way to do that. But I just see that anonymity and privacy are just contra in a fundamental philosophical way to that. And I'm super curious to hear what the others have to say about this.
I'm going to switch over. Thank you, Scott, and to Leander here. I know that sort of something I've sort of been talking to Edgar from Coin about is converging currencies through value systems, or at least that's where my interest lies. So your thoughts on this?
I guess Scott just had this one pointy line in there saying these are opposing values. So for me, thinking about the different regimes of different currencies and how they can come together and be combined, even a market is fundamentally limited by the different values that underlie these currencies. And the problem that we have with bringing everything to market and monetizing everything in the world as it stands today is really that we're just trying to subsume all the different values in the world, human values, economic values, natural values, under this one valuing system, which is money at the moment. If we could maintain different valuing systems and then just compare or offset one value with another, that would be a different regime. But in the same way as there are just so many different values between the global and the tech community and the local and the very on-the-ground communities, and what happens on a computer screen or even in this Hangout doesn't actually mean so much to many people's daily lives. So as much different values that there are in a complex and diverse and hopefully even more diverse and more complex societies by every day, the more probably a niche for different currencies and different valuing systems is out there. And trying to combine them all to whatever mechanism actually kind of defeats the point of maintaining different values with their appropriate expression modalities, that being a currency. So that the whole debate of what Bitcoin is good for, comparing that to what local currencies and community currencies are achieving on the ground, is really worlds apart and needs to be treated very carefully. That's why we often introduce the notion of Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, and which all its benefits and values in that one, and Bitcoin the currency, which might, by the way it's designed and how it's distributed and how it's earned and how it's actually might actually completely be opposed to everything that people might want to have or would be beneficial to people. And if Bitcoin, the payment mechanism, really has anything above and beyond what, for example, mass computer systems are offering to local communities, has to be decided. I mean, it might be an interesting technology, but might actually not help implementation and spread and operation of these systems. But yeah, for that I really would like to hand over to Matt as well, because he knows very well what his technology is achieving on the ground and is involved in these trading protocols and what maybe the Bitcoin protocols and ideas might bring to that.
Okay, thank you, Leander. Thanks. So, Matt, please.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Leander was saying. When I was speaking about a marketplace where all the local currencies can interact and exchange for one another, I did mean comparable local currencies. So a currency that you might use to buy food and, I don't know, teaching services and all those kinds of things in one area would naturally be exchangeable for a similar kind of currency in another area. But then we could have other kinds of currencies which are not exchangeable for those kinds of things. So maybe more reputational systems or currencies linked to gold. You might want to question how many of your hours are worth a lump of gold. And the philosophical problems come in there, which I don't want to get into right now.
How we value our own time, how we value each other. And that's why I put this question up from Michael as to how can alternative currencies defeat people's greed. And another thought that came, the Aeroplan card, Leander, that I know that you sort of that pointed out in your radio debate that is an alternative currency of sorts. People are using alternative currencies. But they don't see them as that. So maybe if we can have something that's popular like that then implements the values that we need. There was one I saw here on Bitcoin. Okay. From probably pronouncing your name incorrectly here, Javier Cruz.
I know Javier, yeah. Javier Cruz is from Barcelona.
Thank you. Then you can answer the question first.
So where's the question? I didn't see it.
Okay, as far as I understand, currencies like Bitcoin can be created with any purpose. Solar coin, for example.
Yes, well, that's my understanding as well. Okay, I'll ask another question to answer it, actually. My concern and my dream, if you like, is that, you know, there's this whole emerging world of peer production where productive communities create common code, common design, common knowledge, and create vibrant economies around it. The open source software economy, the open hardware economy, and there is one calculation where it's said to be already 1/6 of GDP in the US and 70 million workers. It's called a Fair Use Economy Report. So all the economy that is generated by shared knowledge. And so I was wondering, you know, if there could not be currencies that are rooted in this world, that companies, ethical companies that are commons friendly, work with these, you know, these common goods, could actually create from the bottom up a kind of functional currency that will reward, you know, this kind of engagement. It's a question I have, and it's something I would like to try at some point. For example, I'm working now with the Catalunya Integral Cooperative in Barcelona, and you know, they have different projects. One is, by the way, a Bitcoin project called Dark Wallet. But their thinking is they want to create this alternative economy which is outside of capitalist accumulation, right? So these are not community currencies as we understand them, like in LEDs or time banks. These would be specific economic currencies that emerge from this new world of value creation and distribution that is not a typically capitalist economy, but something that is already different. And that currency would have to be in some way a commons-oriented currency. So it couldn't be like Bitcoin, where just because you're early and you can mine and you have 10,000 computers, you would own everything, and then the poor farmer in India, he can forget about Bitcoin because he has to buy them with a 3,000% markup. So this kind of thing is something I think that we have to look in the future whether that's possible, and I think this would be a really important development.
Thanks, Michel. Scott, I'm wondering if you talked about Bitcoin had played with different examples. What system have you seen that is the closest to achieving what Michel talked about?
Well, I mean, what came to mind, a couple of things came to mind when Michel was describing that. One was, of course, the utopian vision of Star Trek. Star Trek, they seemed to have everything that they needed. They had their replicators, which is just a MakerBot, basically. Better MakerBot than we have yet, but I say yet. And there was never any mention of money or paying for things or currency. You did not have to use your Bitcoin wallet to get the replicator to make you a cup of tea. That just didn't happen. So, but the question is how are they going on there? Is that just a fanciful utopian ideal, or have they actually progressed consciously? I mean, it really strikes you as it's only possible in a post-scarcity situation, right? I mean, as long as, in my mind, as long as you have scarcity and you have the scramble, I mean, that's the impetus for the accumulation and the greed that you see. One important point I want to make about Bitcoin for all of its, and I'm an early enough adopter, and I was an early miner, so I've profited. I'm one of those people. The point I like to make about Bitcoin is, whatever else is going on so far in the history of Bitcoin, it represents a massive transfer of wealth to crypto-anarchist politics, and I think that's a very good thing to be happening at this particular point in the history with what we see going on with surveillance. So I'm expecting a lot of that capital to flow directly into projects that bring back privacy online, and it's basically a reaction against what we see. And I think we're going to see a lot of very interesting technology coming out of that community, which can now fund it. They have managed to suck in massive amounts of venture capital. The speculators are all there. I mean, I'm not a day trader. I tell everyone, do not get involved with day trading. It's not the purpose here, but I just can't see how you keep day traders out when there's these kind of dynamics going on and markets going on. I mean, that's what day traders do. So anyways, that's a long-winded way to make a point. It's Billy, I have no idea, but I like the sounds of it. Thanks, Michel.
I think it's happening. We're figuring it out, and like you say, the money coming into Bitcoin. Bitcoin has it's brought currencies, alternative currencies, into the media. It's had negative press as well as positive, but people it's instigated the conversation in a fairly significant way, and money goes where the mouths are, right? So, okay, Leander, Matt, do either of you, would you like to address this?
I would like to add something to what Michel said about maybe creating a global currency for a movement. I think if you regard a currency as a marketplace, and the two, currency and a marketplace, really define a scope of users and of products and services and of trade. I think if you make it a global marketplace, then you're left reaching out to an awful lot of different kinds of people in different languages and countries, and trying to sell them the value proposition to say, come into our marketplace and trade. And I think to do that, you need to be quite well resourced. And that's why the local currencies which have worked to any extent have worked because they've been able to target the local populations and say, look, come into this marketplace, you can build community. But I think doing that on a global scale is much harder, and I haven't worked out a way that it can work yet without a lot of resources to do the marketing and build the platform and everything else.
One more question that leads on to that, and then I'd like to go to Leander, is so is there a way that we can manage value systems in a peer-to-peer manner? So if we had a global marketplace that's created by uniting locally driven community solutions that share the same values, can that be managed in a peer-to-peer fashion?
Yes.
Yes, it can. But is that a question to me?
Okay, yeah, shoot.
Sorry. So I saw that question in the question and answers in the proposed questions earlier, where the one thing that needs to be distinguished again is what do you mean with managed in a peer-to-peer manner. This is not, well, this is often then confused with people proposing Bitcoin as the peer-to-peer currency, which I always ridicule in a little way, saying, okay, if Bitcoin is just a cash currency, then the peer-to-peer qualities are just as much as the good old cash I have in my wallet now. I can hand this to anybody and I do a peer-to-peer transaction with that. The peer-to-peer element really comes into it again in the design and the governance structures of these things. And it's just as easy to imagine a currency being governed by the stakeholders, by the people using it in a cooperative manner with very old-fashioned protocols and old-fashioned incorporation statuses. So you just create your cooperative and write into the terms and conditions that everybody using this currency has one vote at the General Assembly and will determine the further distribution and use and rates and whatever else the currency is comprised of. For that, you wouldn't need a Bitcoin protocol that brings that on the distributed virtual ledger. That is not necessarily the question here. But to what, to maybe trying to link that a little bit to what Michelle was alluring to with this peer production world that we might move into the very hard distinction that's got introduced between, as long as there are things that are scarce that might not work. There is a fuzzy boundary between these two where, of course, we could take the stance of saying if our world would be everything would be abundant and we live in the Star Trek utopia of free energy and free everything, and yes, of course, you wouldn't necessarily need money as we have it at the moment. And naturally, if the world changes, the money chain systems will kind of change with them, or so you would hope, because at the moment it's also quite curious that we have situations called depressions where people still have their productive capacity as before, and people on the consumer side of the equation still have the needs and the wishes and the hopes and dreams as before. They just don't get together, these two things, because there is this medium exchange lacking in the middles where politics and money in the big term really has a lot to do. And in these niches and marginal scenarios, currency design can do a lot of good to actually propel our world towards that. In the very, discussing utopias and endgame scenarios in a complete abundant way is one thing. Trying to find something that is actually nudging our everyday lives and practical applications towards that is really the hard and valuable game at the moment. Many people are experimenting with currency that will be appropriate for completely distributed peer-to-peer free and open abundant world. Reputations currencies have been around for a long time and work in some niche already, even in the for-profit sector like the stars on eBay, and your reputation rating on Couchsurfing and Airbnb is something like that. That doesn't necessarily build on scarcity, but yeah, it's these two sides of the game that also makes this whole world very attractive, saying the utopian, idealistic, philosophical, political dimension, and the very practical on the ground, how to make it happen, part of it.
I'm very much for the Star Trek utopia here, and I think that the more distributed we get in the discussions that we have together, the more open we are, and the more we find ways of approaching all problems and challenges in a peer-to-peer manner, such as taking care of the elderly and so on, that the need of governments will perhaps start to reduce and the power of the people will increase. And so some of that stuff that we have that's blockading us from this peer-to-peer management where money we just exchange in this Star Trek utopia is easier to happen. But Michelle,
I actually have a little scenario I'd like to share to go to the Star Trek utopia. So imagine this. First step, we have communities who create common pools of knowledge, design, and code, which is already happening now on a massive scale. Imagine that those people, instead of working for the man, create their own vehicles, their own cooperatives. So they are commoners contributing to the commons, but they are also cooperators creating added value around these commons for the market. And so the surplus value, if you like, stays within the same sphere of these cooperating commoners. Imagine, this is the next step, that you have a new type of license, which I call the commons-based reciprocity license. Now the key idea here is, if it's non-commercial, you can do it. If you have a social goal, you can use it. If you're for profit and you contribute, you can use it. There's one little exception. For-profits who do not contribute to the commons have to pay for the use of the license. Now it's not about the money, it's about introducing the notion of reciprocity in the marketplace. Now imagine you have this. You have a commons, you have an ethical coalition around the commons. At that time, when you have that solidarity, you can adopt open logistics and open supply chains. And then you already are in stigmergic mutual coordination. Everybody can see what everybody is producing, and you don't really need money. You can use resource-based economics. You can use any measure you want to maintain reciprocity in the system. It's still utopian at this stage, but you know, we're working on this. We have a few little companies that have adopted a license, and we're going to try it out and see how that works. You know, it already works for code and design, and everything that we produce materially, you know, has a immaterial representation. So I think we have a good shot to do this, you know, within the next few years, to have a sphere, a demonetized sphere of mutual coordination at the heart of our economy that will start small but could grow eventually to something bigger.
I love that, and yeah, transparency is key in building trust, and that's what's at the heart of this. Okay, so we're at I'll say 10 o'clock here. I'm in British Columbia, but we were a little late starting, and I don't think we're going to have time to invite people watching to come in and ask questions. But I would like to take the opportunity to invite the panel to address other members of the panel. And ask them some burning questions. So, hands up, who wants to go first?
I have a question for Michelle. Michelle, I know that Satoshi Nakamoto was an active participant on your forums and your website and your service, and discussed aspects of the design of Bitcoin. I'm curious what you would say to Satoshi now. What request in terms of changing the design of Bitcoin you would make to Satoshi at this point?
Right. Well, essentially that I think the peer-to-peer aspect of the creation of the money should not be the computer but the human being. There should be some technique that ensures that every human being can actually create the coins, and so it doesn't depends on the number of computers that you have, right? And then some protocols, like the ones that are used in Mendo, where, like, if a song gets too popular, instead of every vote counting, it's only every 10 votes, and then there is a threshold where it's only 1 out of 100 votes. And so they have all these mechanisms that keep a distribution not fully equal. Nobody's asking for that, but within bounds, right? You remember the salaries. We used to have 1 to 8 or something in Japan 30 years ago. Now we are 1 to 800. And these people are not working 800 times better than the ones who have one. So I think the money should also take into account social aspects, not just basically greed, which is Bitcoin is designed around the deflationary design and people thinking they're going to get richer over time. So I think a more balanced design would be something that I think is valuable.
Can I just throw in the concept of the social proof of work? So that Bitcoin is given to machines who prove that they have expended the processing power in validating the network. But a social proof of work would be a currency, as you say, which is given to people who can prove they have done something socially valuable. So that would be a really excellent way to issue currency.
Right, yeah.
It's only a question of who decides what work is valuable. Who decides that that work has been done?
Yes. Where again you're down at local governance issues and models and necessities that.
Are you guys familiar with the open value accounting system from Sensorica and others, where so I give you my understanding, and I'm not sure I'm 100% correct, but more or less it's like this. You contribute to a project freely, passionately, but you log your time and the project number. You have a peer review. That creates a score. So the combination of your self-declaration and a peer review creates a karma score. And that karma score is linked to a social contract that says, if we make money from this at any time, the money will flow back according to your karma. And I think this is a neat-sounding solution that answers that question, where you have a combination of autonomy but also the peer review that balances out the erroneous declarations that could be made.
Michelle, I think that's a really great starting point. But I think there is also a fundamental problem with the social proof of work, which is that it's probably going to be easy for groups to game. And the whole point about the Bitcoin is you can't game it by pretending to offer your processor cycles.
Yeah. No, but I think I see another problem with Bitcoin is that you can have a social policy with it. I mean, as much as we criticize national currency, and I think we should criticize it, in the central banks because they're not democratic enough. They've been embedded in the neoliberal market state and have become servants of, concentrated forces. But at least theoretically, we can imagine, taking them over, democratizing them. With Bitcoin, it's absolutely impossible to do a social policy, and so. So it's I think Scott said crypto anarchist, but it's also anarcho-capitalist, right? It's a very particular political ideology which has embedded its values in the currency. And the commons movement, the localized community movement has done that with LEDs and time banks. What I'm waiting for is the global commons movement, embedding some of its needs and values in a different code, which I think does not exist yet, but a lot of people are thinking about it, talking about it. And there was recently an interesting conference in Italy about, what is the money for the common, where a number of interesting things came out of as well. So I think it's a bit early in the game, but we will get this kind of experiments with a new type of currency, which is globally scalable, but based on on huge virtual communities, translocal virtual communities that co-produce some kind of value together. That's what I'd like to see.
Thank you, and came to mind there your crowdfunding platform, Scott, Dano.ai. Thinking about karma coming back to you. Yeah, my understanding with that platform is that you're inviting others to support and help finance their crowdfunding campaign, essentially. And
yeah, well, I'd just like to make a point, actually, that I think some will find interesting. With our platform, Dana.io, DANA.io, throwing another plug for it, we accept payments or contributions towards any project of three kinds. The first is PayPal credit card, because a lot of people use that, and we're still kind of tied into that. That's not my favorite platform by any way, shape, or means. The second is through various cryptocurrencies, and obviously I'm a strong believer in the use of those for supporting good projects and social projects, and that's part of what we're trying to do there. The third way, though, which I think people here will find interesting, is that it's within the power of the campaigner to register a payment that they have received through any other mechanism. So if they've received Dunbar dollars, if they've received whatever, they can go and put that as an offline payment that is made towards their thing. So we really encourage contributors to campaigns on the platform to get in contact with the campaigner, establish a relationship, and figure out the least, what's going to work for the campaigner and what's going to work for that contributor, and make the least cost, least transaction fee related, or support other values in terms of supporting that particular crowdfunding campaign.
Right.
Oh, you're muted, Karen.
Thank you. Just looking at the chat messages, and Michelle asking, can someone write it down? And one thing that I need to, Michelle has to go. One thing that I do want to do, there's been an awful lot of very valuable information, so I'd like to re-listen to this and try and extract some key points that you've all made, and create some kind of blog with that, and then link it up with the questions that I can see that other people have asked there, and then I'll reconnect with you guys to see when we might be able to do another hangout. So we are out of time. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and for allowing us to overrun. Sorry we missed having Edgar. Michelle,
He sends his regards. I get Edgar's regards by SMS, and he says apologies, but he couldn't connect on his holiday. Sorry.
Thank you, but I will say Coin is an excellent organization. I met with them.
Thank you, guys. I really have to go. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so the hangout's been recorded, so everyone watching, please share it. And as I said, I will put a blog out there, and get in touch with the next hangout as soon as we have the details. If you've got any questions you want to send to me, or comments, or feedback on how we've run this hangout, then please feel free to send me an email, caroline@thecitizensmedia.com, or send a message through Facebook or Google. Leander, Matt, Scott, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate not just the time you're spending with us today, but everything that you do toward change. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Very nice meeting you all, and great job, Caroline.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Bye.